if you're still on the fence that UAP are even real, this discussion is not for you. I've seen enough evidence at this point that I would like to see the discussion move forward. If you're one of those people, this discussion is for you. Data is king. I agree. We must follow the data and remain skeptical. However, we must also keep an open mind. The most important aspect of this is the science behind it. If we are observing an anomalous phenomena, we are observing anomalous data. There are numerous examples of anomalous data outside of traditional UAP investigation. Some of us are open to Hal Puthoff's research into remote viewing at SRI and Project Stargate. Consciousness has been an area of interest for some despite the lack of much scientific understanding of that topic. My point is, we are clearly willing to venture into unknown, paranormal territory. I'm a little confused at how few of us are venturing into the fringe science or territory of LENR and cold fusion. Perhaps these words carry the same stigma as alien or UFO. And you immediately want to distance yourself from those that talk about wild conspiracy theories related to cars that run on water. I get it. That's understandable. I'm not convinced the water engine is real either. It sounds crazy for sure. I'm not proposing we investigate and discuss these topics as a believer in them. I'm pointing out that we have sufficient evidence that we have some sort of gap in our understanding of physics in UAPs. We also can infer that it leads to a potentially new energy source. That's a big deal. There has been numerous reports from both laymen and credible scientists of what the media called cold fusion, dating all the way back to the 70s and 80s. They continue to this day. Of course, these claims can be attributed to mistakes, errors, fraud and hoax. However, just like the UAP phenomena, this creates stigma to not take the subject seriously or investigate it. One does not want to look like a fool. One important point often overlooked is that if there is truly an anomalous scientific result, then it's not surprising if it can't be repeated or replicated, and that doesn't mean that there is nothing interesting there. If there is some result that is real, but can't be understood scientifically, then it may be very difficult to verify and look like an error. I'm not a fan of rampant conspiracy theory. Yes, a truth embargo is a conspiracy theory. Allow me to explain how we can be our own worst enemies. If a brand new effect or aspect of science is discovered that could lead to a revolution in physics and industry never before seen, people want credit. They want to earn the Nobel Prize and or the patent. They want the discovery attributed to them and all the riches and glory that go with it, and rightfully so. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. The problem is that this leads to secrecy. Perhaps you find an investor, but they want you to keep it secret. Perhaps you are looking for an investor, but you're afraid they will steal it from you. Perhaps you try to open source it and you are ridiculed and have your career destroyed. Perhaps you honestly thought you understood how it worked and could repeat the results, and then it stopped working and you couldn't figure out why. If you already accepted investments, you may now look like a fraud, especially if you worked in secret. We have seen that there is an ability to suppress information related to the UAP topic. Is it a stretch of the imagination that this can manifest itself in the scientific community and academia? That alternative energy research would be an area subject to the same kind of truth embargo. I've begun my research into this topic and I'm amazed at how many credible scientists have made claims of cold fusion only to destroy their reputation and career. I'm sure there were honest mistakes made, but does that account for every case? There is a shocking amount of material that suggests many independent groups have in fact discovered some new nuclear process that leads to transmutation and unaccounted for energy production. Not only is that a big deal, but transmutation is some pretty hard evidence. I'm shocked. There are published scientific papers. There are very credible scientists and organizations working on this. Hal Puthoff being one of them. Hal Puthoff worked with Ken Shoulders on EVOs. He also has connections to Project Sapphire. Even SRI has done work related to the subject. There's the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, which is open sourcing the science behind this subject. There's so much I honestly don't know how to recommend you begin. I'll simply share this interview between Ross Coulthart and Bob Greenier.
Well, I was going to ask if you'd mind the same thing, to be honest.
No problem. I just like it that way. And is it okay if I publish it on my podcast?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I'm constrained by what I can ask you about if I
You're not constrained from my point of view.
Yeah. I mean, look, what I'm really interested in is, I won't use his name because obviously we're possibly talking in public, but there's a mutual friend of ours who is very interested in low energy nuclear reactions, cold fusion, and exotic vacuum objects. And I'm writing a book on UFOs, UAPs, and trying to do it as a serious insect investigative journalist, talking to primary sources and trying to break through the barriers of secrecy with some success and some difficulty. But what it has convinced me is that if this phenomenon is real, there has to be a propulsion system and energy technology that is not yet acknowledged within known terrestrial science. It leads me to the obvious question: is that technology some kind of plasma technology? Because so many of these objects are showing some kind of plasma around them. I've interviewed US pilots who describe this kind of blue plasma over the object which they're looking at, which has no visible means of propulsion, no known terrestrial acknowledged form of lift, such as wings or a balloon lift or anything like that. It's completely and utterly alien. And so I guess I'm wondering whether in your travels, what conclusions you've reached about the plausibility of alternative propulsion systems that might explain what I'm looking at with unidentified objects, and whether you think that we're on the cusp of a propulsion technology or maybe an anti-gravitic technology that has not yet been acknowledged.
Well, I don't know if you saw my How Do They Build Nan Madol?
No, I didn't.
Okay, well, I seriously recommend you go and look at that video.
Yep.
On the 31st of December.
Yep.
I really haven't watched much TV during my adult life.
I don't blame you. Most of it's drivel.
Well,
and
I grew up in a household with one black and white TV and 3 channels, and all of it was boring. You know, the most exciting thing was the test card that turned on if you managed to stay up late enough to see it.
I can tell you this, Bob. The thing that I am most excited about is, as somebody who's worked in high-end mainstream media for much of the last 35 to 40 years, I am gobsmacked, absolutely gobsmacked that the mainstream media is not crawling all over this story. It blows my mind. Because
I'm going to give you 2 exclusives in this conversation, and they are foundational for me. And I have not made these public. So I'm going to talk about those, but I just want to do the lead-in, which was, as I said, on 31st of December. It's lockdown here, and you can't do anything after 9 o'clock outside. So you've experienced that in Australia, so you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
And so I thought, God, maybe I'll have a look at some of this ancient alien stuff. The reason is because it just popped up on my Amazon Prime account. Okay, this is not an advert for Amazon. It just happened to be there when I went on it. And it had series. It said that you have access to series 1, 2, and 3. I didn't know how many series there were, and I thought, well, let's start at the beginning, episode 1.
This is Ancient Aliens you're watching. The guy with the weird hair. Yeah.
You know what? I'd like to say I didn't notice that, but I did. But I don't think he cares. I think it's a feature. He likes
it's a trademark. Good on him.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, if
he
I
didn't
had
have it,
hair,
everyone
I'd
would be
probably
going,
make
"Oh my
it
God,
weird as well."
So yeah, I'm looking at this program, and I'm thinking, hold on, I already the thing that they're talking about in this other than the fact that the video quality was obviously low definition and stretched to high definition, and it was repurposing a lot of media. That didn't matter so much, as the point was I'd already realized by January 2017 that this technology family would explain all of the megalithic structures. And the slide that I shared in that Nan Madol presentation had several of the, in fact, all of the sites that they mentioned in that first Ancient Aliens. And I'd already.
Can I be a pedant for a moment and ask how you spell Nan Madol?
Yeah, you see, I get this wrong because I only found this out the following day on the 1st of January this year. And I still said it wrong, but it's NANMADOL.
Oh, I got it right. Okay.
Ta-da! Yep. Is my pronunciation.
Is that best found on YouTube?
You can go to the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project channel, and you can see it. In the description, it should have a link to my blog, which is called remoteview.icu, and that is a podcast and a written blog. And if I'm doing a podcast, I almost always write the text down of that, and it's a newsletter, so it can't be destroyed. Anyone who subscribes to the newsletter, they get it in their inbox. So if for whatever reason it gets taken down, the content is still available to all those that were members of the newsletter. So to try and keep some persistence. Anyway, the nature of this second program was about this site called Nan Madol, and I'd never heard of it. I'm 49.
I must confess I haven't, no.
Well, it's closer to you than it is to me. It's 2,500 miles off the east-west coast of Australia, in the middle of, not quite the middle of Pacific. It's 250 kilometers from the US Pacific testing grounds.
Oh, at Johnson Atoll?
Not Johnson Atoll, the other one. The
Marshall Islands.
Atoll. Eniwetak Atoll, where they dumped.
Because I've been up there. I mean, it's quite scary. I went there once because we had a corrupt minister of government here who was doing naughty things in the Marshall Islands.
You had a corrupt minister of government?
I know, it's a shocker.
I didn't think they existed. Carry on.
But we went from Hawaii through to Johnson Atoll, and it's really cool. They make you feel welcome because the plane lands, and there's a guy with a 50 caliber machine gun pointed at the plane. And you're told on the cabin audio, if you get off this plane, you will be shot. It's really, and it's where they were. It's where the American government, the military, were basically dismantling all their chemical weapons and destroying them in huge incinerators. And sadly, for the local indigenous folk, it was deemed a good dumping ground for old nuclear waste and excess chemical weapons. And while I was there, I mean, to my shame, I did the story about the corrupt politician and left town, but it's a tragedy in Melanesia. All those beautiful people are suffering long-term radiation injuries as a result of the exposure that they've had to low-level nuclear exposures caused by the bomb tests 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah. And in fact, when I realized what this technology can do most easily, I wanted to focus on radiation remediation and specifically to deal with Fukushima, Chernobyl, and Eniwetak Atoll, because Eniwetak Atoll is the biggest threat, actually, probably to the Pacific in terms of mass radiation. I know, you might consider it to be Fukushima, but Fukushima is on the mainland, and people can at least be there to deal with it quite quickly if there's something happening. Eniwetak Atoll is literally in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, so there's this place called Nan Madol. Now I'm going to go back a little bit in my history, and this project that we set up in South Korea called the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. Basically, Martin Fleischmann, I'd love to have met him, and he died 3 weeks before the conference, and so I didn't ever get to meet him. But I realized at the conference, as did 4 other people that were there, that this technology was real, this technology that they called low-energy nuclear reactions. And I could see the thread in different people's research. But the problem is that everyone wanted to win the Nobel Prize. Everyone that got really successful, some investor came from somewhere and basically said, don't talk about what you know. or someone came in and got them to spin plates until they died, and that's the problem. So it wasn't going anywhere. So I thought the only way this is really going to work is if it's completely open. And I've come up with a lot of different concepts with how to do certain things, and I thought I could really do something here. And there was a guy there called Ryan Hunt, whose father had developed a little sort of embedded controller system for monitoring power in houses, and he thought he could repurpose that to deliver what I wanted to do, which was deliver science real time on the internet. Okay, anyway, that's just the foundational sense. We set up the project. Now, within a year and a half, we had I think our biggest donor. He's been one of our biggest donors for a while. I won't mention his name, but he for a reason, he was running a business that was using heavy oil for a number of years, and vast quantities of it. And given the country that he's from, he took on some guilt for doing that and sold that business and bought into another business that was, he could be more comfortable with. And he's a fantastic steward of that business. And I had the pleasure of meeting all of his staff once, and they basically love him. He's one of these leaders who cares, even after someone has left the business and gone to join the competitor, he'll still invite them to the public events. So the company events. He doesn't hold any malice. So he's a very special person.
And he's one of the sponsors of, if you like, of the
he has been one of our biggest sponsors. Because
I was going to ask you, how do you do this? I mean, it's obviously incredibly
great difficulty. Great difficulty.
Are you the only person that run it, or are there other people involved?
Yeah, we've got 3 directors at the moment, and most of the core work the project was set up as a way to test other people's claims. We're not trying to invent things necessarily, although when you get a sufficient understanding, you can at least put ideas into the field, which we have done, and people have acted on those, and they've come back to us. So the whole thing is about this virtuous cycle. And in the case of this particular sponsor, I mean, the people that have put most into the project are actually the project researchers, and in some cases they put many tens of thousands in. And
great.
In my case, 8.5 years, and I came from an extremely well-paying job. Because it was boring, I thought, I don't want to spend my life and get to the end of my life and look back on my life and go, I made a lot of other people rich. I was at the top of a business. I was getting a big paycheck, but I was spending it out on my cost of living because of where it was or whatever, for whatever reason. And what have I got to show for it? People like to leave a mark, whether it's a famous quote or whatever. There's got to be some motivation in life.
And please give me faith. Please make me feel reassured about this, because I'm doing something slightly similar in the sense that I've stepped away from a mainstream investigative journalism career.
If you're going to step away at any time, you're doing it at the right time.
Yeah, because I think the whole free-to-air television industry is dying. It's moribund. But more importantly than anything else, it's not engaging in an inquisitive way with the stories that need to be told. And this one, UAPs, alternative energy systems, alternative propulsion systems. I mean, my Luddite brain has understood for some time that there is a really cracking good bloody story there, and somebody's got to dig it up, and I've been waiting for somebody to start nibbling at it. And my friends Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal from the New York Times have done some noble work.
Credit to them.
Yeah, but the thing that really shocks me is I've just finished a book. At the moment it's way too long. It's about 140,000 words, so I've got to hack it back. But I'm gobsmacked at some of the stuff I've dug up. And because of COVID-19, I've had to do most of my work over the phone or on encrypted apps or over Zoom or Skype. And the thing that has really impressed me has been how time and time again, what I did was I followed the strategy of people aren't going to want to talk to me if I leave a trail. So if I leave an electronic trail to Joe Bloggs, the the scientist who's probably working on anti-gravitic technology, is not going to want to talk to me. So I found, with the help of our mutual friend in many cases, a lot of home addresses of very interesting high-level people all over America, and in fact all over the world, and wrote them letters. And I didn't really expect to get that many letters back or calls back. But very slowly, I've got Telegram and Signal, you know, the encrypted apps. I've got WhatsApp, which is increasingly less secure. I have Proton Mail. Very slowly, stuff started dribbling in. And sometimes people were talking anonymously, but it blew my mind because it made me realize you're absolutely right. There is an incredible story out there that is just bobbing under the surface of mainstream media coverage that nobody's looking at. Like, you know, they're in the water, sitting above the water, looking at the sky and everything around them, but they're not looking under the water and actually digging. And the thing that blows me away is I'm so frustrated because people are probably going to find my book interesting, but I'm now going, oh, Christ, I'm almost embarrassed to publish it because I now know so much more since I started researching it. And now I know as I come out of talking to you, I'm going to find myself thinking, oh, Christ, why didn't I go down that path or that path? And the thing, though, that I've been really heartened by is the willingness of people to engage. And there's an exceptionalism about America I don't particularly like, but there is a beautiful willingness to share science and ideas and to have intelligent conversations that I really admire in Americans in particular. I've seen it everywhere else in the world as well, but there's a joke I've had many years that I think Americans have an extra strand of DNA. They understand the media in ways that other countries don't. And I think it's because they've had TV for so long. Mm-hmm. And they just get it. They deliver sound bites. They speak clearly. They kind of intuitively understand the importance of media. I think it's drummed into them in civics classes in school. Whereas, frankly, you and I mean, I used to be a Brit, and I know you used to be a Brit, and here in Australia we've got the same problems. The Brits try and classify everything. You know, they are obsessed with secrecy, and you know, if it's a menu in a restaurant in the middle of the Defence Signals Directorate in Australia or the GCHQ in England, they'll classify it because it might jeopardise national security. Whereas here in America, I have been blown away by the willingness of people at a high level in defence and intelligence and science to engage. And
I think maybe some of that comes from the fact that a lot of the core research for this was done a good number of years ago. These people, they've got their pension assured, and there's not much left of it to run. Or some of them have got other means, and so they don't care. And they do realise that the information, it should be out there, and it's unreasonable for it not to be out there. And when I give you some more context about my story, you'll realize, I think, and I would hope you would realize, that you shouldn't fear giving the information out because it's actually our human right. It's as much as right to life and the pursuit of happiness. You know,
I completely agree with you. I mean, the thing that I've had several people say to me, including a serving member of the US Defense Department, is it's outrageous that this has been kept secret for so long, and that there's no good reason for it to have been kept secret for so long. And indeed, what I'm wrestling with is explaining...
I can give you several, but pin that thought. But I can give you several.
Well, let's hear it. I'd love to hear your analysis.
Well, stepping back to where I was in the key points and the reveals that I want to give you, this individual, as I said, he had been a principal funder of the organisation. And in fact, in a couple of years, we could not have achieved some very significant milestones had it not been for his support. But that's not to take away from the literally thousands of people that have sent like $10. You know, that adds up and it makes it possible. And you run yourself lean
Sure.
and so forth. And it's amazing what you can do. But also by being open and committing to try and finding a solution and putting the information out there. If you are wrong, you have the idea of the organization was that if you put the information out there, it's live and it's unadulterated. Most of these significant findings we've had in the first 4 or 5 years was from the crowd monitoring our data whilst we were asleep. They go, something happened at this time overnight, and you look at it and you go, oh my God, something really did happen, and what does it mean? And then you come up with a hypothesis and it's challenged, you know, but the people aren't being paid to do that. And my father always said, a volunteer is worth 10 forced men. And it's absolutely true. A person who really wants to know, and they don't have to be asked, they don't have to be forced, they don't have to be under threat to find out the truth. They will just research and research and research.
It crossed my mind when I was reading about your group that it's a bit like a scientific Bellingcat. Are you following Bellingcat at all?
I don't, please.
Oh, well, Bellingcat, you should look at it. It's a fantastic site. It's kind of a journalist's wet dream. Basically, what they do is they use open source information. And one of the things I was involved on the periphery of investigating the tragedy of the jet aircraft that was shot down over the Ukraine by the Russians. And there were a lot of Australians on board. And so we were desperately keen to try and prove and hear proof as to who the perpetrators were. And it actually was a plucky little Brit who, in the middle of some suburban town in England, sat down and started using things like, firstly, Google Maps. And there were a couple of social media photographs that he found of a Buck missile launcher traveling through the Ukrainian countryside. And he had dates. And then he just started doing good old-fashioned OSINT, open source intelligence, just going through that open source intelligence. And finally, one of the big breakthroughs that he got was he found the Facebook page of a Russian paratrooper who was operating this Buck missile launcher. And the metadata for the photograph placed him in the location where the missile was fired. And really exciting stuff. And a lot of that work has been done by people sitting at home on computers, nerdy types like you and me, who just basically sit there and go through data and find satellite photographs and telemetry that people didn't even know existed as ways of further proving a thesis, a hypothesis. And it's really exciting. And it struck me a lot of what you're doing with the project is very similar.
And it's there's less available information on data aggregators like that, but there is now a more than 3-decade extremely detailed set of papers. And whilst I think at the conference at ICCF 17 in 2012 in South Korea, there were probably 130 plus theories of how this worked. And many of the theories worked in different situations. So one theory would work with solid gas, one would work with gas, one would work with liquid gas, you know, but they wouldn't all explain all of the phenomena. Yet you were getting, if you actually paid attention, similar transmutations in different systems. And so why isn't there not a common thing that's going on? And so on. So and it was clear that it was likely that people had certain threads were partially correct. And I said probably maybe 6 years ago that this will be the last great thing that's discovered by man, because everything else will be discovered by AI.
That's a big call. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Oh, okay. Right.
Because
I've got you.
Because when all the data is available to a machine, it can find the patterns almost immediately.
Yeah.
And the answer drops out of the bottom. So what we've been effectively doing is creating a hive mind, which is effectively learning all of the data, challenging it, and only the answer drops out the bottom. So we are intelligence, before we get replaced by artificial intelligence.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think we should be frightened of that, because I think you're absolutely right. I thought initially you were going to say that there were no more scientific discoveries to be made, but
No.
I agree. I think AI will probably crack it from this point on.
But
But
fortunately, I think it has been cracked, and I think that's going to become increasingly clear. So back to my story. This guy, he kept telling me I had to go and watch the Serious Disclosure, and I thought,
oh, not that Stephen Greer thing, really?
It doesn't matter. Listen, it doesn't matter, because I'm not into UFOs. I'm not thinking about anti-gravity. I'm not thinking about any of that. He just keeps on saying, you need to go and see this. You need to go and see it. It's like a little birdie in your ear, you know, and I'm going, okay. And I actually run my life on a need-to-know basis.
Yeah.
But then I think late 2016, I thought, this really has implications for potential gravity modification. Why does this guy keep telling me to go and look at this series? And I actually didn't know it was. I can't recall whether I know. Maybe I did, that it was Stephen Greer. But anyway, I went and looked at it, and I go, well, I know how that works.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So, and it's like, now I understand it. But that is one reveal for you that I finally gave in to someone who is constantly being a little birdie in my ear, saying I needed to go and look at this. I needed to go and look at this. I needed to go and look at this. And at some point, it's like some point in the universe is channeling through him to tell me to do that, whether it's right or wrong. I at least need to give him the courtesy of looking.
Sure.
Now, what he didn't know is what I'm about to tell you now. He does know now, and in fact, he's the first person outside of personal family that knows this. And you are going to be the second. And everyone that listens to this podcast is going to be whoever they are.
I'm flattered.
Right. So the point is this: when I was 7 or 8, but your memories may or not be fixed on an age at that point. But I'm 49 now, so I would suggest at least 40 plus years ago, my father, who was he was a very senior Mason within the Masonic system. At one point, he said he was the most senior Mason in the UK. He was certainly beyond the Grand Master, but he was the oldest. I think he meant most senior, as in I'm the oldest at the moment that is a Grand Mason, something like that. He died at 72, so it's a little bit hard to believe. But you know, sometimes family members embellish things. But certainly, I knew he had been a Grand Mason, and he said for whatever reason that I was suitable to go into the lodge when I'd passed my 30th birthday or whatever. And I said, Dad, that's not my path. I said, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's not my path. That's exactly what I said to him. And so, having seen this documentary, having had this guy in my ear for years say, you must go and see this, you must go and see this, and you go, oh God, okay, I'll see it. I then have to tell you the story. And so my father, it was a late summer's night and cloudless sky. And my father asked myself and my family members to come downstairs. And we had like a big room which used to have a black and white TV in with the 3 channels and a nice open half fireplace where our dog used to set itself alight. And I'm looking out the window and he says, right, look up there. And way up into the sky, way beyond where the clouds would normally be, 4 lights go blink on, and they're in perfect equidistant formation. They go zip, zip, zip. And for those that don't know what I'm doing with my hands, I'm gesturing jerky, instantaneous moves to the left, to the right, to the left, or right to the left, to the left, right, depending on your perspective. And then they all blinked off. And he said, right, kids, you can go to bed now.
So, okay, now you've got me really going. How did he know they were going to be there?
That's the point.